Alright, the first part of test 2 is done. 7-hour run with the 10 gauge. And as a matter of fact, I got all the batteries charged back up already. I do have some pretty decent battery chargers. This one here actually charges 4 at one time. And that one down there charges 2 at one time. After 7 hours, I did make 2.44 kilowatts. But it took me 5.12 kilowatts to charge them all the way back up. As a matter of fact, there was 2 of them in there that took 17 hours to fully charge. Anyway, let's go through this here. Anything you see in between the red lines here is actually connected to the grid ties. At the start, I was making 380 watts at 3.2 amps. And at the end, after 7 hours, I was down to 314 watts at 2.72 amps. The power factor pretty much remained the same. All right, we'll take one of these for example. All right, fully charged, this battery number 2, which is the worst one in my bank, it was reading 12.85 volts with the voltmeter at 100%. When I plugged it into the grid tie, it dropped down to 12 volts at 91%. After 7 hours, it went down to 10.37 volts at 21%. And when I disconnected it, I think the next day I came out and I checked all the batteries again. This one came up to 12.17 volts at 93%. Now I did that with every single battery, and I'll try and get this focused in here so you can actually freeze it and save it. It's going to be interesting to see what the thicker 4 gauge wire does, because with the one bad battery here, it didn't seem to bring the whole bank down. I mean, this one is up to, even after 7 hours, still 11.88 volts and 84%. This one, number 1 battery here, this one's a little weird, because even after 7 hours, the meter was still showing it was at 100%. So I'm not sure what was going on there. But anyway, I am just waiting for some ring terminals for the 4 gauge so I can do the second part of the test, and that'll be next. Alright YouTube, I am into the second part of test 2, and another little change. I actually found a bunch of 2 gauge wire. This is the thickest stuff I got. And I have 2 gauge connecting all 8 batteries in another 7-hour run again. Right now, okay, as you can see, we are almost 3 hours into it. I made a kilowatt. Right now it's at 365 watts. Had a little over 3 amps. Power factor has been the same at 96%. Alright, I started a chart. I'll transfer this stuff over to this one when I'm done. And this shows you what I started at. Originally, with the 10 gauge, it was 380 watts. Well, this one was 393, but after 20 minutes, it came down to 382. The battery bank, when I charged it up, was probably charged a little bit better than the 10 gauge run, but so it'll have a little handicap there. We'll keep an eye on it, see how many kilowatts are made. And one of my concerns was, as I mentioned before, is inside of this inverter is that small, maybe 16 gauge wire, 14, whatever the hell it is. And so I've been keeping an eye on the temperature. It hasn't gotten over 80 degrees, so it's doing fine. Checking here, let me check this one here. This is the worst battery down here. Okay, the worst battery, which was at 100%, is now at, let's see if you can see it. Okay, 80%. Okay, let's hook this back one up real quick. Okay, this battery is at 95%. So, using the number 2 gauge, I don't see the battery bank dropping with one bad battery. I don't see that happening here. I know they say one bad battery will bring a bank down, but in this case, it doesn't seem like it's doing it. And I'm pulling from the opposite ends of the bank. Alright, there doesn't seem to be too much of a difference using 10 gauge as opposed to 2 gauge. We'll find out in the end. Alright, the second part of test 2 is now complete. I ended up making 2.50 kilowatts as opposed to 2.44. That is only a difference of 60 watts out of 7 hours. And keep in mind, the recharge voltage was actually higher on the second part of the test than when I charged the bank the first time. With all things considered, there is no evidence that 2 gauge is better than 10 gauge as far as heat, cable thickness, even the battery. The bad battery, if you want to call it, did not seem to drop the whole bank. Now when they say bad battery, I wonder if they refer to a battery that barely holds a charge, because this battery is not bad. It does hold a charge, just not as good as the rest of them, where this one appears to be the best battery. And it still remained at 100% after a 7-hour run. Now, just to give you a better idea on the difference in size between the two, there is probably 4 to 5 times the amount of wire in the number 2 gauge as opposed to the 10. And with there being no evidence that the thicker is better, it kind of seems like a marketing ploy to spend more money on the fatter cable, because in my setup I just don't see it. I mean, between the two, you'd expect the results to be a little more significant, especially with the size being so much different. But don't take my word for it. Run the test yourself. I don't see why 10 gauge is worse than 2. And I know there's some people who say, well, there's, you know, it's choking off amps and everything, but remember, you know, in the grid tie itself or inverter, any inverter you use, the wire inside it's being choked right there anyway.